The country that bombed Iran's nuclear sites in 2025 is the same country that built them. Not metaphorically, not as a political argument. Literally. In 1957, the United States handed Iran its first nuclear reactor. American scientists flew to Tehran and trained Iranian engineers on how to handle enriched uranium. MIT signed the contract. The Eisenhower administration called it a gift between allies. The program that 7 B-2 stealth bombers flew 18 hours across the world to destroy was built on a foundation America itself laid down. That is not a footnote. That is the entire story, and almost nobody tells it that way. You have seen the headlines, the strikes, the bombs, the celebrations. What you have not seen is the 70-year chain of decisions, betrayals, and quiet calculations that made that night inevitable. Because this was not a sudden act of force. It was the end of a story that started long before most people alive today were born. Here is what really happened. Go back to 1953. Iran had a democratically elected prime minister named Mosaddegh. He had done something that made the West deeply uncomfortable. He nationalized Iran's oil industry, taking it back from the British company that had been extracting it for decades, while most Iranians saw almost none of the money. In August 1953, the CIA and British intelligence ran a covert operation to remove him. They paid street mobs, they bribed military officers, they manufactured chaos. Within days, Mosaddegh was arrested, and the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was restored to full control. The operation worked perfectly. Iran never forgot it. The Shah, now firmly in Western hands, became America's closest ally in the Middle East. In return, the United States gave Iran weapons and, in 1957, its first nuclear research reactor. America trained Iran's first generation of nuclear scientists. It gave them the tools, the textbooks, and the technology. Then, in 1979, the whole arrangement collapsed. The Iranian Revolution did not come from nowhere. By the late 1970s, millions of Iranians were exhausted. Decades of the Shah's rule had brought economic growth for some and brutal suppression for everyone who dissented. His secret police, trained in part by the CIA, imprisoned and tortured thousands of opponents. In January 1979, the Shah fled. The revolution had won. Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile and took power. Every agreement the Shah had made with Washington was either abandoned or turned into a weapon. Khomeini publicly called nuclear weapons un-Islamic. The program paused. But the engineers, trained by American universities, did not leave. The knowledge did not vanish. And as Iraq launched a chemical weapons campaign against Iranian soldiers in the 1980s, with the quiet approval of Western governments who said nothing, something shifted inside Iran's leadership. They reached a conclusion. A country without a deterrent has no protection. The only deterrent the world takes seriously is the one no army wants to test. The program restarted. This time, completely in secret. Before we go further, if you are watching this and realizing the version of this story you knew was missing most of it, you are not alone. This is exactly what this channel does. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. The most important part is still ahead. For almost 2 decades, the world had no idea. Then in August 2002, an Iranian exile group stood before cameras in Washington and revealed what Western intelligence had either missed or quietly ignored. Iran had secretly built a massive enrichment facility at Natanz, buried underground. The IAEA had never been told. Iran had been building in secret for years, while attending international meetings and signing documents promising transparency. That press conference changed everything. But Iran had already learned one critical lesson. Natanz was found because it was not deep enough. If you want a facility to survive, you do not just hide it, you bury it inside a mountain. They already knew where to dig. 30 kilometers northeast of the holy city of Qom sat a range of mountains long used by the Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iran chose a spot and went to work. Drilling teams carved tunnels 80 to 90 meters into solid rock, deeper than any Israeli bomb in existence could reach, deeper than most American bombs could penetrate. They surrounded the entrance with surface-to-air missile systems. They installed radar. They pointed every defense they had at the sky above that mountain. By 2009, when Western intelligence forced Iran to admit the facility existed, it was already operational. The name of the site was Fordow, and it had been designed from the first shovel of dirt with one purpose: to be unbombable. For 16 years, it worked. In 2015, a deal was reached. The United States, along with 5 other world powers, signed an agreement with Iran. Iran would cap its enrichment and allow inspectors in. Over $100 billion in frozen assets were released. For 3 years, the deal held. In May 2018, the United States walked away. Iran waited 14 months. Then it dismantled every limit it had agreed to. By 2025, Iran was enriching uranium at 60%, one technical step below weapons grade. IAEA cameras were blocked. Inspector access was cut. New talks began in 2025. Muscat, Rome, Geneva. 3 rounds. The US wanted a permanent end to enrichment. Iran refused. Both sides walked away each time. Then Israel moved first. In early June 2025, Israeli strikes hit Iranian military infrastructure across the region, beginning what became known as the 12-Day War. Iran fired back. The region held its breath. In Washington, a decision was made. On June 22, 2025, at approximately 2 in the morning Iran time, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers were already in the air. They had left Missouri hours earlier. 2 crew each. Total radio silence. 3 mid-air refueling operations across the Atlantic and the Middle East. 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched simultaneously from a submerged submarine. Their job was specific: hit the air defenses around Isfahan before the bombers arrived. The cruise missiles hit first. Then the B-2S arrived over Fordow, the mountain Iran had spent years making unreachable. 6 GBU, 5.7 massive ordnance penetrator bombs dropped on Fordow alone. Each bomb weighs nearly 15 tons, the largest conventional bombs America has ever built. 2 targeted the reinforced ventilation shafts. The first pair collapsed the covers. The second pair drove deeper. More bombs hit Natanz. More hit Isfahan. 125 American aircraft supported the operation in total, and Iran's air defenses did not fire a single missile. Not one. Every surface-to-air system around those sites stayed completely silent. The radar, the launchers, the systems built and maintained for years to protect what was inside that mountain. All of it. Silent. The operation lasted less than 2 hours. Then the bombers turned and flew home. By morning, the images were everywhere. Trump declared Iran's nuclear sites completely and totally obliterated. The phrase spread globally. It felt like a final chapter. But 4 days later, a defense intelligence assessment arrived. The operation had set Iran's program back by an estimated 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months. Then came the harder news. Iran's stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, stored at Isfahan, had potentially survived. The IAEA was blocked from entering any of the sites. Nobody could verify from the outside what was destroyed and what was not. And then came the detail that changes the meaning of that entire night. Analysts published a finding that Iran had built, over decades, thousands of engineers who understood the centrifuge designs, the enrichment processes, everything inside those facilities. That knowledge does not live in a building. It does not sit in a tunnel under a mountain. It lives in the people. No bomb ever built can reach that. America built Iran's nuclear foundation in 1957 as a gesture of partnership. It removed Iran's elected leader in 1953 as an act of convenience. It watched Iran get attacked with chemical weapons in the 1980s and said nothing. It signed a deal that slowed the program down, then walked away from it. Every one of those decisions fed the next one. Every shortcut, every withdrawal, every moment where the long consequence was ignored for the immediate result moved both countries one step closer to the night. 7 bombers flew 18 hours across the world. The bombs fell on the buildings. The knowledge that built them is still standing. And that is the part nobody on the morning of June 23rd was willing to say out loud. If you want more stories like this one, real events told the way they actually happened, with the parts that got left out, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because most of what happened that night was already buried under the headline. And the headline was never the story.